Hey, Larken Rose here. Time for the Daily Rant. My topic for today has to do with the distinction between the non-aggression principle and just generally not being a bastard. The main thing I talk about is don't commit aggression against other people, don't advocate that anybody else commit aggression against other people, which necessarily requires not condoning government in any form of any kind, of any flavor, of any size. But there, I've mentioned before the fact that whenever there's a movement to change the general paradigm and the way people think about something and the way people view the world, the first people in line are usually the misfits and weirdos and outcasts, which I would put myself in that category. So it's not meant as an insult. It's just the people who do well, given the status quo and given the way things are, have less of an incentive to make waves and try to change things. I mean, it's just kind of basic logic. So you get freaks and weirdos who are usually the ones to push society forward, if you want to put it that way, because they're usually the ones who have something to lose by the injustices of whatever the oppressions of the day happen to be. So again, that's not an insult to freaks and weirdos. If anything, it's a compliment. It's the freaks and weirdos are usually the ones who lead the way to improving the world, as odd as that may sound. And it's important to notice when the normal people and the successful people and the well-adjusted people and the people who fit in, when they start to notice that something's wrong, that's awesome, because it's, you can get in a situation where only a few kooks and weirdos say something. Like the concept of self-ownership and anarchism, people have been saying that for hundreds of years. They didn't always use the same words for it, but they've been saying that for hundreds of years, but it's only been a wacky little weirdo fringe minority stating the bleeding obvious for centuries and centuries. And now it's getting into mainstream, and it's getting a lot of quote-unquote normal people. And I know if these terms are offensive, just kind of too bad. I mean, you know what I mean. There are some people who fit into society and some people who are sort of weird and different enough that they don't fit the usual mold of how people are supposed to be. And so, given the way society is at any given moment, there are some people who just kind of don't really fit in. And it's the don't really fit inners who usually start the progress. And then when the rest of society goes, oh yeah, you have a point, and then follows along, that's when the world changes. But you can have a situation where a few kooks and weirdos are stating the bleeding obvious for centuries and nobody else is paying attention. All right, so there's that phenomenon where kind of misfits and outcasts tend to be the first to jump ship off of the conventional paradigm and say something's horribly wrong with this, because they have a lot less to lose by not going with the crowd. I mean, they already don't belong in the crowd, so they just keep not being in the crowd and say we should be going this way instead. And the thing is, that can make progress look weird and kooky for a while. And there are people who are anarchists and complain about government who are pretty weird that I don't particularly want to be associated with, because they're not entirely there. Oh, while I'm at it, I might as well also include the phenomenon that genius and insanity are closely linked. Like, you have the majority of people who are sort of normal and their thought patterns are normal and their belief systems are kind of average and accepted. And then you have, most of the great music composers were off their gourds. They're a bunch of freaking lunatics. And a bunch of inventors were loonies. Because if your brain is capable of thinking outside the box, sometimes it kind of thinks too far outside the box and loses all grip on reality. And so there's a balance there. And I see that. And you can say, hey, that's not true all you want. But I've seen a lot of cases where the people able to question things often imagine and believe really weird, bizarre, irrational things too, because they dare to have their mind outside the conventional wisdom box. And then the ultimate extreme of that is there are some people who they want to believe stuff just because other people don't. And to me, that isn't any more rational than believe this because everyone else does. Believe this is because everyone else does is stupid, but so is believe this because nobody else does. So there are some people who want to have weird beliefs just to have weird beliefs, and they're still not objective or rational when it comes to deciding what's true and what isn't. But yeah, so some people, the people who can think outside the box are crazy, weird, eccentric, whatever you want to call it, because that's who tends to be able to think outside of the normal paradigm. So at the beginning of progress, it's mostly kooks and weirdos. Again, I would, at least to some extent, put myself in that category. And then when it catches on in mainstream society, then humanity moves forward. But because of that, in the quote-unquote freedom movement, there are a bunch of people who are like bitter, annoying outcasts who, I've talked about this before, people being againstists, where what they're all about is fighting against the majority, and it isn't even necessarily principled or anything. It's just, I'm in this, I think most punk kids who wore the anarchy label have no freaking idea what it means. They're just like, anarchy, that's cool, yeah, I'm a rebel, and I'm for taxes to give to the poor. It's like, okay, so you don't have any idea the meaning of the words you're using. You're just kind of babbling whatever you think makes you different. And so there's that, and again, there's a good side of that. The rebellious tendency is very important, very useful. Unfortunately, a lot of the time it's wasted on, so I'm going to go, do drugs, and that's all. That is the extent of my rebelliousness. I'm going to do whatever they tell me not to. I'm going to go smoke cigarettes and get lung cancer and die, but I'm not going to be like them. So this tendency to be an outsider and a misfit is very useful if people use it to actually go in the direction of the truth and how things should be, instead of just sort of doing the instinctive backlash reactionary thing of, I'm going to be whatever people tell me I shouldn't be. I'm going to dress in a way that offends people and talk in a way that offends people and do things that offend people because I'm so cool because I offend people. And I don't care if I offend people by saying the truth, but I don't offend people just for the fun of it. However, there are those in the movement who do offend people just for the fun of it, as far as I can tell, because they're againstists, and what they care most about is being outsiders and being edgy and being different, and it's just, sort of depressing and stupid, and frustrating to watch, because then people get the impression that that is what the movement is about. And so, on the one hand, there's the fundamental principle that most matters in the world. The non-aggression principle, or self-ownership, or voluntarism, or however, whichever side of the elephant you want to describe. The fact that each person owns himself and it's not okay to commit aggression against somebody else. They all tie together. They're all different ways to say the same concept. That's really, 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 really damn important. And the reason I focus on that so much is because that matters way more than everything else, because not understanding that truth is what leads to war and oppression and injustice and perpetual divide and conquer tactics and all that nasty stuff. And for me, that's, easily top of the list of what needs to change about society. However, it is quite possible to have a society or a group of people who all believe in and abide by the non-aggression principle, who are generally obnoxious bastards who I wouldn't want to have anything to do with. Your only actual positive obligation is to refrain from committing aggression against somebody else. You're allowed to be a jerk. You're allowed to, never do anything with anybody else. You're allowed to offend people. You're allowed to be a rude butthead. But, and the punchline of this rant is, it would be nice if you weren't a butthead. And the problem is, when the outcast buttheads look like they're the ones speaking on behalf of the movement, then everyone else starts to associate anarchism with being an obnoxious bastard, which doesn't exactly win people over. And again, people have the right to be an obnoxious bastard, but if your goal is, I want more people to abide by the non-aggression principle, maybe don't do things that make average people associate voluntarism and anarchism with obnoxious bastards. And if we had a society, and the thing is, I think, issues like authoritarianism and control and all sorts of things play a big part in making people turn into obnoxious bastards. Feeling helpless in a situation where you have authoritarian parents, or you're in school and being bullied or beaten up by other people, or wherever it is. A lot of the times, the feeling of being weak and helpless is what makes somebody into a violent, obnoxious asshole. And I say it makes them into it. That they do have free will; they could choose not to be that. But the general pattern is those sorts of situations are what lead to people being like that. And, there are exceptions, and you can argue about that all you want. But I think a lot of that wouldn't be there if you get one or two generations in a stateless society, because people wouldn't be forced into a situation where they're feeling powerless. Where if parents didn't treat their offspring like slaves and didn't forcibly dominate them as if I am the authority and you are the underling and you must do as I say, these things would go away really fast in most cases. But it is, on top of the most important issue, which is don't advocate aggression against somebody else, there's also just sort of be nice. Sorry, I needed to do a rant just to tell you be nice. But the way it comes across to the rest of the world, it matters if we care how quickly we end statism. And, people tell me you should wear a suit when you speak, and I just say, no, I'm not freaking going to, because I hate that. To me, a suit represents the uniform of control freaks and liars. And so I'm not saying play a phony part, pretend to be something you're not, but keep in mind the way it comes across. And if you can distinguish between, in your message, look, I'm a rude butthead, you don't have to like me, but we can get along if we don't initiate violence against each other, then, that can sort of minimize the effect of being a butthead. But there are tons and tons of people out there who are decent people who are turning into anarchists, and the trouble is, the ones that are most capable of compassion and empathy aren't the loudest. They're never the loudest ones. The ones who want to speak up and be vocal and be loud, in any movement, in any political party, in anything, the most obnoxious people are usually the loudest. I mean, it's almost just a truism that the people who want to go out there and put their face and their name out there and go blah, 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 blah. And by the way, you could lump me in there if you wanted to, because I'm loud and I offend people and I don't care. But I don't offend people for the sake of offending people. But there are lots and lots of people who believe in voluntarism who are not, most of the people who know them wouldn't even know that about them, because they're not in evangelization mode. And again, I'm not saying evangelization mode is bad. That's what I am. That's what I do. I talk about this and I try to get people to give up their statism. So I'm not condemning doing that. But there are lots and lots of anarchists and voluntarists who most people never hear of, and if they do, it's a little quiet, polite, one-on-one discussion. And I know that is spreading anarchism all over the place in a way that the movement never hears about. Because the movement is about who can get up on a pedestal and yell and scream. Again, including me, because I do that. But the spread of the ideas through the rest of society is going to require a lot of normal, quote unquote, quiet, decent, polite, nice people, I can almost talk, spreading the ideas one at a time. And I know a bunch of them because they've told me. I know a bunch of people who are quiet about it and are not at all abrasive and argumentative like me. The people who are not like me and are all calm and quiet say, you know, I wish I had better stuff to point people to. Like, I like some of what that guy says, but he just turns people off and he's obnoxious. And some people will say it about me, as I'm too judgmental and stuff. And so I'll try to take my own advice a bit here. If the voice, it's like the most vocal Democrats are raging communists. The most vocal Republicans are warmongering psychos. The most vocal in any group are the ones who want attention and want to be loud and want to change things, whether they're trying to change things for the better or the worse. That's just kind of who gets heard. The loudest people get heard. There, that's my truism for the day, is the loudest people are the ones who get heard. And what really matters for the spread of voluntarism is for the quiet, normal, polite, nice people to spread anarchism and spread voluntarism. And it's happening all over the place to a degree that I think the movement often just doesn't even notice. And I won't mention them by name, but there's a few people I know who are really good at just having nice, polite, understanding, compassionate discussions with statists and very quickly get them to question what they've always assumed without attacking them and bludgeoning them. And again, I sort of think my role is to do the attacking and bludgeoning routine, where I directly assault people's assumptions and paradigms. And I know that because people have told me, I know that some people, that's what they need to question things, a direct, in-your-face, argumentative challenge. And I think when I was a statist, that's what I needed in order to think about things. I think people being polite to me probably wouldn't have done much. But there are a lot of decent, nice, polite people who what they want is the decent, nice, polite version of explaining voluntarism. And that's what I'm, the interactive project I'm working on is as passive and gentle and non-judgmental and non-accusatory and non-argumentative as anything I can possibly imagine. And the thing is, it takes discipline for me to keep writing in that mode, because I naturally want to argue and point out things are wrong and tell people they're wrong about stuff when they are. And it's been a real exercise for me to try to always keep it in the passive, gentle, understanding tone of voice, because that's not my default. And it's not the default of most of the people who are vocal in the movement. So I'm not sure there's exactly one point here. I guess there's several. One is there's a lot of progress happening way outside of the movement. And if the movement fell over, I wouldn't particularly care, because that other progress would keep happening. And another point is, if you want the ideas of self-ownership to spread, maybe try not being such a butthead in public, because then people will associate this with this. Just like people always do with every movement. Oh, you're one of those people who are like blah, blah, blah. They have a stereotype in their head. Well, it would be nice if the stereotype of anarchist wasn't obnoxious, loudmouth, heartless bastard. And so I really like the fact that there are tons of different people doing it tons of different ways. And I think one of the most important things, so I'll end this with a huge thank you to people who get no notoriety and no notice, because the way they spread voluntarism and anarchism and the idea of a stateless society and self-ownership and all that is quietly and unobtrusively and politely and gently with the people they know. And so thank you to all the people out there who do that, who the movement doesn't know their names. and doesn't notice them and doesn't give them awards and doesn't go rah, rah, rah and all that. Because what we need is lots and lots of those people, in addition to a few screaming, ranting lunatics like me, to actually change the world. And now I'm driving past a fascist. Hi, fascist. You piggy. So, that concludes my rant for the day.